Find out more, I spoke to Julia Lo Bue-Said, who is Chief Executive of Advantage Travel Partnership, UK's largest network of independent travel agents, and Paul Charles, Chief Executive of the PC Agency and a former Director for Virgin Atlantic and Eurostar. I began by asking Paul, what's causing all the problems?
It is rather ironic that obviously the industry has been through such turmoil over the last 2 years, and then when recovery is emerging and there is light at the end of the tunnel, it's finding it difficult to cope. But it's no real surprise because a lot of people have sadly left the industry over the last 2 years due to furlough or due to straight redundancies by airlines, airports and others. And also because they just got fed up, frankly, with all the government restrictions changing every month or every week. And it put a lot of people off working in the sector. So now that recovery is here, then a number of travel firms, not all, but a number of travel firms, and especially the airports and airlines, of course, have found it difficult to recruit enough people in time. And that's why they're finding it difficult to deliver in some cases.
Clearly, there have been problems at particular airports and flights have been cancelled. I mean, Julia, how bad has it been for travellers trying to get away?
I think it's incredibly frustrating, and I think, as we've sort of heard from Paul there, I think having waited so long to really be able to get customers on flights, to be in this situation. However, in the main, obviously what we hear through the reporting is all the really bad stuff and all the really chaotic stuff. There are huge amounts of consumers that are travelling. We've got 1 million people flying out this weekend. A vast majority of those will go out, seamlessly. But we're travelling at a really peak busy time. So inevitably, unfortunately, we do expect to have delays at the best of times. So I think the culmination of pent-up demand. Restrictions also only eased on the 18th of March to come back into the UK. So we've got a very short period of time where all of a sudden this pent up demand is kind of engulfing the sector all over one weekend. So it's incredibly frustrating, but I've seen it. We're at the front end, we're at the sharp end with our agents, and I've seen how hard everyone is working with government to ensure that we can get passengers out as quickly and as unchaotic as we can.
Paul, there seems to be a bit of a blame game going on, but isn't part of the problem the airlines themselves who laid off far too many staff or sacked them all together and now seem to have been taken by surprise by the fact that the whole travel sector is reviving somewhat with the lifting of restrictions?
Well, you're right. I mean, there was a warning last December from the World Travel and Tourism Council who said there was a 220,000 person shortfall in the labour market that needed to be made up in order to provide the right level of service as recovery picked up this year. But to be fair, who would want the job, frankly, of being a CEO of an airline or of an airport when they had to deal with so many ups and downs, from government restrictions to demand being all over the place to another variant coming along at the end of last year in Omicron. And it's impossible to plan your business in a really predictable way when you have these being thrown at you. So it's just really sad and unfortunate. And of course, it's frustrating, as Julia says, for consumers. But it's been impossible for bosses, frankly, who run larger businesses especially, to really plan effectively. Yes, they should have hired earlier. They did start hiring earlier, but then they froze recruitment due to Omicron because they became scared again. And they thought that recovery would come back less quickly. But it's come back faster, which is good news because consumers have the confidence. And I'm actually convinced that we may only have to put up with this another 6 to 8 weeks or so. I think you'll find there'll be fewer cancellations emerging. In fact, there were yesterday substantially fewer cancellations of flights, and also the airports will recruit faster. But it's not easy. It's going to be a bumpy few weeks ahead.
Yeah, especially as, Julia, we're hearing that the border force are understaffed. They seem to have lost an awful lot of their personnel as well. And of course, along with the airline cancellations, we've actually got delays when people arrive or are trying to leave.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm in all areas. I think we've got a shortfall in border force, and let's not forget they are government-appointed agency staff that work and that control border force that work in the area, but also the passes that the airlines need and airports need for security passes, which are provided through the government. So there are bottlenecks right the way through it. And the other area that we are seeing bottlenecks doesn't affect the airports, but people trying to get away is passport applications. We've got 10-week delays on those. So it's a really unfortunate situation where actually restrictions have eased over one of the busiest weekends, and at every area there are bottlenecks accumulating, which is a real challenge. So the airports are working very closely with government to ensure that the security passes can be provided quicker. The airlines are working very closely with government to really ensure that border force we can have more staff at border force to help with that, with those floodgates. And at every touch point, really trying to ensure that we can just try and get a bit of fun put back into the experience, which so many people haven't been able to do for the past 2 years.
Yeah, and
I remember when I was applying for my security pass when I used to work at Virgin Atlantic, it was 4 weeks. Not too bad to be checked out and for them to check your background and who you are, who you say you are. Now it is taking upwards of 15 to 16 weeks to get that pass. And that's partly because a lot of people have been moving around during the pandemic and not in the same job. So it means if you're a security official having to check somebody's background, you're having to talk to maybe 8 to 10 different employers to find out that path, the career path, is accurate. So it's understandable why it might be taking longer. But the problem is all of this is going to put off some people from travelling, and it's the last thing we need in the sector at a time when we need to get that confidence restored.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point, isn't it, Julia? Even if it is just another 5 or 6 weeks of chaos, if that coincides with Easter when many families are finally able to get away, it is going to undermine confidence, isn't it? After the travel industry has been through a very, very tough couple of years, people might once again say, well, we've been through the pandemic and it's still a nightmare if you want to try and get away anywhere.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think inevitably there will be some people that just don't feel confident for many reasons to want to travel right now. But thankfully, what we are seeing quite clearly, there is a huge pent-up demand. I think that pent-up demand, as we said, is unfortunately happening over Easter period when schools are broken up quite clearly. So there is going to be extra strain on all those services. But it will start to improve, and we'll start to, as we get into kind of low season and build back up again for the summer, we will start to see that level out and be able to provide the services that we need to. I think the other thing that we're also seeing through all my members is actually businesses coming in very late. So the ability to be able to plan is really challenging right now. So 40% of everything my members are selling is coming within the next 4 weeks for travel. So trying to plan ahead in the normal trends that we used to be able to plan by are just not there right now. So we're all learning what these new trends are and actually what the consumer behaviour is. But I do think it will come back. And certainly, as I said, we've all got to work. We've all got a part to play to make sure we can ensure travellers can be confident and make sure they're prepared for when they get to the airport. How do we help consumers make sure they can help ensure they can get through as quickly as possible so they're prepared? Whether that's documentation, restrictions are still, there's still restrictions in many destinations. So lots of paperwork we still need. So everything we can do to really try and ensure those bottlenecks at the airport are as minimised as possible is a really important part we're trying to play.
Okay, Paul, what advice would you give to people who are still hoping to get away? What's the best approach to try and avoid those bottlenecks, or indeed to try and get your money back or get onto a different flight if you do run into problems?
Yeah, well, the good news is that those cancellations are coming down. So your chances of being affected, I'm convinced, over the next few days are lessening by the day, which is really good. There were only 36 cancellations yesterday compared to 104 on the 1st of April. So the number of flights being cancelled is coming down, which is a good thing. Secondly, don't turn up at the airport too early. Literally 2 hours is plenty. And you will get through security, even if you're in a long queue, because you'll find that staff will call out your flight to make sure that you do catch it. So don't turn up 4 hours before or 3 hours before. Turn up 2 hours before. I think thirdly, don't pack very much in your hand luggage. I know it's easier said than done, but the more you pack into your hand luggage and all those creams and bottles, the more the security teams have to process, of course, and the more likelihood is the queues will grow because they're finding bottles that are 120 million millilitres instead of 100, for example. So there's things you can do like that to ease those queues and help speed things up. I think the other thing is, if you're a family travelling, do make sure that mum and dad, whoever seniors are, carrying games and things for the kids to play with, because if you're caught up in a queue, there's nothing worse than the kids being angry and frustrated. And so it helps to distract them with something different.
Yeah, well, clearly that's good advice. Bring along all the video games and so on that you can. Julia, just any further advice that you would add to people who are still hoping to get away and really worried that instead of having a lovely break with the family, they're going to spend half of it at an airport or stuck in a queue trying to get to the ports?
Oh, I would honestly say that in vast majority cases, travellers are able to get away and enjoy their break and have a fantastic time with their loved ones, visiting friends and family. There are bottlenecks, as we talked about. A lot of it happens to be at different, it's not at every minute of the day. So unfortunately, if you are caught up in that, it's really, really unfortunate. But you can still absolutely travel, and we all can see from the pent up demand how much it's missed. If you're booking through a travel agent, make sure you've got all the information you need. And the other piece of advice added on to what Paul said is the documentation. Just make sure you've got all the right documentation you need, because that will really help you get through the airport as quickly as possible. But I think most importantly, remember why we all love to travel and have some, there are some fantastic memories to be made, and a very enjoyable experience at the other end, albeit you might have to spend the first couple of hours at the airport.
Well, that was Julia Lo Bue-Said, Chief Executive of the Advantage Travel Partnership, and Paul Charles, Chief Executive of the PC Agency, speaking to me a little earlier here on Times Radio.